Good morning, everyone. This is June 27th, 2021, and we are coming to you from the Washington, D.C. United Lodge of Theosophists. We welcome you to this special commemorative meeting in honor of Robert Crosby, founder of the United Lodge of Theosophists, and who we fondly call RC. Such commemorations are held by ULTs all over the world near the time of RC's passing, which was June 25th, 1919. This is also a special time for ULT DC, as this is our 100th anniversary year. A few months before RC left the scene, B.P. Wadia became aware of his work, joined the ULT initiative, and was instrumental in the establishment of the ULT DC in 1921. At the end of last month, the ULT DC Lodge moved to the historic Moore Green District in neighboring Northern Virginia in Manassas. Next Sunday, July 4th, we will be meeting here at 11 a.m. for a presentation on occult origins of the United States. You are invited to join us here in person, or you may also join us online at Google Meet. Should you wish to join us on Google Meet, please email us at ultdclodge@gmail.com so we can send you an invitation. On July 11th, we invite you to join us on Google Meet as we resume our online studying of answers to questions on the ocean of theosophy. To present theosophy continually is our self-assumed work, as we pass on the message transmitted to us by H.P. Blavatsky and William Q. Judge. We are able to do this because RC revived the original teachings as they were presented by HPB as a messenger of the masters, and WQJ as staunch co-worker. ULTs throughout the world have kept this message alive to this day since RC led the establishment of ULT in 1909. It is an act of faith, as RC says, among the many, or few, who may be interested in theosophy, here and there, one who may wake up. Therein lies the hope. And those who are interested enough to merely listen or to read with attention will get something in the way of a trend that may someday develop. If we keep trying in all ways and means open to us, something will come from such mutual endeavors. RC is remembered as the friendly philosopher. The fruits and nature of RC and the ULT have kept the genuine theosophical movement alive in the world. At a period in this dark cycle when it would surely otherwise have perished, and for this RC deserves the lasting gratitude of all students of theosophy and lovers of the message of the Masters of Wisdom. Those seeking to truly be in accord with nature's law of universal brotherhood are invited to help us in the work of keeping the link to the teachings unbroken. These teachings provide a foundation for those who would be co-workers with nature. We will now have readings from the writings of H.P. Blavatsky, William Q. Judge, and Robert Crosby, followed by a presentation on Mr. Crosby's contributions to theosophy. And as I pass this introduction on to the first speaker, I want to take a moment to recognize our dear friend and former colleague, Tunjai Dantzler, who I know is so proud of us in this moment.
Our first reading is from the writings of H.P. Blavatsky. The wisdom religion is the inheritance of all the nations the world over. Our idea of the unknown universal deity, represented by karma, is that it is a power which can't fail, and can therefore have neither wrath nor mercy on the absolute equity, which leaves every cause, great or small, to work out its inevitable effects. The saying of Jesus, "With what measure you mete, it shall be measured to you again." Neither by expression nor implication points to any hope of future mercy or salvation, neither by expression nor implication points to any hope of future mercy or salvation by proxy. This is why, recognizing, as we do in our philosophy, the justice of this statement, we cannot recommend too strongly mercy, charity, and forgiveness of mutual offenses. Resist not evil, and render good for evil are Buddhist precepts, and were first preached in view of the implicability of karmic law. For man to take the law into his own hands is anyhow a sacrilegious presumption. Human law may use restrictive, not punitive measures, but a man who, believing in karma, still revenges himself and refuses to forgive every injury, thereby rendering good for evil, is a criminal and only hurts himself. It is an occult law that no man can rise superior to his individual failings without lifting, be it ever so little, the whole body of which he is an integral part. In the same way, no one can sin nor suffer the effects of sin alone. When every individual has contributed to the general good what he can of money, of labor, and of ennobling thought, then and only then will the balance of national karma be struck, and until then we have no right nor any reason for saying that there is more life on the earth than nature can support. All pain and suffering are results of want of harmony, and that the only terrible and only cause of the disturbance of harmony is selfishness, in some form or another. Hence, karma gives back to every man the actual consequences of his own actions, without any regard to their moral character. But since he receives his due for all, it is obvious that he will be made to atone for all suffering which he has caused, just as he will reap in joy and gladness the fruits of all the happiness and harmony he had helped to produce. It is this belief in the just law of retribution that is more likely to awaken every combative feeling in man. A child, as much as a man, resents a punishment, or even a reproof he believes to be unmerited, far more than he does a severe punishment if he feels that it is merited. Belief in karma is the highest reason for reconcilement to one's lot in this life, and the very strongest incentive towards effort to better the succeeding rebirth. Make men feel and recognize in their innermost hearts that is their real, true duty to all men, and every old abuse of power, every iniquitous law in the national policy based on human, social, or political selfishness will disappear of itself.
Our second reading comes from the writings of Mr. Judge. Some years ago, one of those masters in whom so many of our members believed directed HPB to write a letter for him to a certain body of theosophists. In this, he said that each member could become, in his own town or city, if earnest, sincere, and unselfish, an active center from which would radiate unseen powerful forces, able to influence men and women in the vicinity for good, and that soon inquirers would appear, the branch in time be organized, and thus the whole neighborhood would receive benefit. This seems just and reasonable, in addition to its being stated by such high authority. Members ought to consider and think over it so that action may follow. Too many who think themselves theosophically alone in their own town have folded their hands and shut up their minds, saying to themselves that they could do nothing, that no one was near who could possibly care for theosophy, and that that particular town was the most difficult for the work. The great mistake in these cases is forgetting the law indicated in what HPB wrote. It is one that every member ought to know, that the mind of man is capable of bringing about results through means of other minds about him. If we sit and think that nothing can be done, then our subtle mind meets other minds within the radius of our sphere, not small, and shouts into them, nothing can be done. Of course, then nothing is done. But if unselfishly and earnestly we think theosophy and desire that others should, like us, be benefited by it, then to the minds we meet in stray moments of the day and in many hours of the night we cry, Theosophy, and help and hope for thee. The result must be an awakening of interest upon the slightest provocative occasion. Such an inner attitude, added to every sort of attempt at promulgation, will disclose many unsuspected persons who are thinking along this very line. Thus will the opportunity of the hour be taken advantage of. The masters have said this is a transition age, and he who has ears to hear will hear what has thus been said. We are working for the new cycles and centuries. What we do now in this transition age will be like what the great Dian Chohans did in the transition point, the midway point in evolution. At the time when all matter and all types were in a transition and fluid state. They then gave the new impulse for the new types, which resulted later in all the vast varieties of nature. In mental development, we are now at the same point, and what we now do in faith and hope for others and for ourselves will result similarly on the plane to which it is all directed. Thus, in other centuries, we will come out again and go on with it. If we neglect it now, so much the worse for us then. Hence, we are not working for some definite organization of the new years to come, but for a change in the manas and buddhi of the race. That is why it may seem indefinite, but it is nevertheless very defined and very great in scope.
Reading number 3 comes from the writings of Robert Crosby. Effective theosophical work cannot be done unless there are found persons in the world who can see the necessity for it and will fit themselves more and more to supply the need. That certain persons find such an opportunity is their karma, but what do they do with the opportunity depends upon the realization of its importance. Once we see something of what the theosophical movement means to the world, we are necessary to it, not as persons, but because we see and do. The movement is accelerated by us to the extent we work for it, and hindered to the extent that we, as we were, let it pull us along. So every student who will strive to make himself a fitting instrument is necessary to the work, to his full capacity, soul, mind, and body. Always we act in accordance with the position assumed, so let us take the highest position, the position that is shown by everything in nature. If we take the high position, we not only act in accordance with the greatness of the position taken, but we come to a realization of it within ourselves, where it's all perception of it, all fulfillment of it. It is apparent to anybody that the cause of all human troubles is selfishness and ignorance. The ignorance which is the cause of the selfishness lies in men's way of thinking, their ideas in regard to life. The prevailing idea is that there is but one life, and that each must struggle for himself as against all others. The very idea contains in it fight, opposition, his hand against every man and every man's hand against him. As long as these ideas prevail in men's mind, they will act selfishly and in opposition, where self-interest is concerned. The theosophist knows that what the true way is, that many lives, and that in each life he reaps what he sowed in other lives, as well as in this one. That if every man were to have this knowledge, he would see that true happiness for all can be obtained only when each human being uses all his powers for the good of others. Under such a way of thinking, no man would be allowed to suffer for one moment, because there would be many willing hands to help on every side. The greatest need then is to have a right and true theosophy and true philosophy of life, for the following of it will not only bring relief from the many forms of suffering, but a knowledge that will lead humanity to greater heights. The Theosophist works to relieve the cause in the only way possible. Doubtless, if Theosophists were more numerous, they would be found relieving every possible distress to the best of their ability. But unfortunately for the world, they are few, and are thus compelled to put all their energy into calling attention to the true nature of man and to a philosophy of life, so that more and more minds may be turned that way and the day of relief brought nearer.
Friends, the impulse, the motivation, and the tireless activity which led Robert Crosby to eventually form the United Lodge of Theosophists saved the original and genuine teachings of Theosophy from oblivion. Teachings of HPB might still be out of print and largely unavailable today, were it not for R.C. and a few others who took it upon themselves at great personal expense to revive the exact, unaltered, unabridged writings of H.P. Blavatsky and William Q. Judge. So it can truly be said that R.C. rescued Theosophy. HPB was the mother and creator of Theosophy, number one. The teacher, the message, and the messenger in one. The nature of her work exposed her to selfish interest in religion, science, and the Theosophical Society, which were imperiled by her mission, or overshadowed by her greatness. HPB referred to William Q. Judge as the preserver of Theosophy and the heart and soul of the esoteric section. Upon her death, Mr. Judge became the target for attacks upon her, only at last to become victim, as she had been, to treachery from within the society. The enemies of the faith are always from within the household. There is always one witness on the scene. After the death of Mr. Judge, R.C. rose up to keep the link unbroken. Few realize that this earnest man, whose heart and soul were assimilated to the nature of HPB and WQJ, was the agent for the regeneration of the Theosophical movement on the lines laid down by the masters. So HPB was the creator, WQJ was the preserver, and RC was the regenerator of pure Theosophy. RC always pointed to our teachers, never to himself. He claimed no credit for authoring the talks and articles he left behind, as they were all based on the work passed on through our teachers. RC showed the way to any students who might in truth be seeking the path. One of the few articles for which RC claimed authorship was about his recently deceased friend. The article titled, A Friend of Old Time and of the Future. As such does William Q. Judge appear to me, as doubtless he does to many others in this and other lands. The first theosophical treatise that I read was on the epitome of theosophy by Mr. Judge. All his extraordinary ability of turning seeming evils into powers for good. I have had many proofs. That he was a great occultist, many know by individual experience, but none have fathomed the depths of his power and knowledge. The lines have been laid down for us by HPB, WQJ, and Masters. R.C. steadfastly held high the unadulterated message of the Masters as transmitted by HPB and WQJ amongst usurpers, traitors, and their unsuspecting followers. Stick to the messengers and the message, he would say. In quoting from a master's letter, he noted that ingratitude is not one of their vices. Go on with the work, R.C. said. We are working in the present for the future. Unless the nature of HPB and WQJ is grasped, theosophy is not understood and cannot be understood. Number 3. R.C. was born on January 10, 1849 in Montreal, Canada. Both parents were Scottish. They met and married in Canada. R.C. was raised a Presbyterian and was invited to join the communion at age 16. But he considered himself still unfit, and subsequent discussions caused him to doubt the honesty of that church's practices. He determined to find the truth, which must be knowledge, and which was to be found in due course by seeking it. He adopted an attitude of constant questioning as to life's object, pain, sickness, death, mercy, justice, fate. He found that the religions around him offered no satisfactory answers when he questioned them deeply. In 1869, R.C. and an older partner started a business in Montreal. Soon thereafter, he married the daughter of his partner. R.C. had always had a strong regard for the rights of others and always exercised a strong moral compass over himself. R.C. and his partner sold the Montreal business they had and moved to Boston, where they started a similar business. One day, R.C.'s partner brought him news of the proposed establishment of a branch of the Theosophical Society in Boston. The word Theosophia suggested much to him, so R.C. went to the first meeting. He recognized at once that this was what he was searching for, and he, number 4, joined the TS immediately, being admitted June 5, 1888. Soon after, Mr. Judge came to Boston. R.C. and other new members were introduced to him. Upon leaving, Mr. Judge called back to R.C. "Good night, Crosby. I've got you on my list." Mr. Judge invited R.C. to communicate directly with HPB. R.C. recorded, quote, "A veil was lifted, a tie was formed, which has never since been broken," close quote. Mr. Judge came frequently to Boston and stayed at the Crosby House, and R.C. would stay with him in New York. When the esoteric section was formed, R.C. became one of the earliest members. He was secretary and later president of the esoteric section group in Boston. He identified himself with the Zahn section of the Theosophical Movement and the TS, and was for many years a devoted and close companion of William Q. Judge and an occult pupil of H.P. Blavatsky. Mr. Judge would refer students in the New England states to Mr. Crosby, saying, quote, "I ask Crosby, he thinks his acts as I do," close quote. R.C. worked unceasingly for the movement in his exoteric and esoteric channels. Few ever suspected R.C.'s connection with HPB and Mr. Judge was more than casual and incidental. From 1894 to 1896, R.C. was witness on the scene of Mr. Judge being attacked, exonerated, and later persecuted again by the chief officers of the TS outside of America. WQJ and R.C. maintained their position that the Theosophy alone was held to be the sole reason for the TS. TS asked Mr. Crosby to take up residence at Point Loma outside of San Diego, California, then at newly established headquarters of the TS in America. He was required to turn all of his personal assets over to the organization. After 4 years of trying to convince TS to stay along the original lines laid down, he saw that this would not happen. He and his wife left Point Loma penniless. R.C. got employment at the Los Angeles Times, became acquainted with his neighbors with similar interests in Theosophy, and he and 7 others decided to organize on their own, adopting the original principles and the original program of the masters which HPB and Mr. Judge had embodied practically during their lifetimes. Number 6. On February 18, 1909, ULT was launched, with the Declaration being its only basis. That declaration still stands today. It is short but full of meaning. It's on the back of our program. It comes out every quarter. R.C.'s letter to all open-minded Theosophists invited them to become associates. His letter included comments like, "Theosophists cannot learn the truth about nature and themselves in any other school than that provided in Theosophy, and in the lessons to be learned from self-study and the study of theosophical history. From the beginning, but a handful recognized the gravity of these issues involved, and that is still the case. Work, the will to study, apply, and so come to understanding the play of forces in human nature, the practical application of the third object." R.C. would refer to the semi-esoteric character of the ULT. he stressed impersonality and anonymity in order to protect the work, and to protect the workers from pride and ambition. He was no believer in diluted theosophy. His loyalty was wholehearted and single-minded. When one of his associates was bemoaning some failure, he said, quote, "Do not grieve over failures and partial successes. It is the effort that counts. He who, with a right motive and with sincere goodwill, does the best he can and all that he knows how to do, does enough." Number 7. Theosophy magazine was founded in November 1912, with Mr. Crosby serving as chief editor until his death in 1919. Number 8. In 1915, Theosophic School was started. In 1916, Because for Children Who Ask Why, edited by Mr. Crosby, was issued. Mr. Crosby also set most of the Theosophy School songs to music himself. Mr. Crosby attended personally to an incessant stream of correspondence from inquirers who came in some unknown ways to learn of him, and to seek his kindly advice and suggestion. He never denied his help, but gave freely, without stint or limit. In his last article, Mr. Crosby reiterated the position that theosophy is not constantly changing set of ideas, but a consistent and complete body of knowledge to be studied, applied, and promulgated as originally presented. As regards himself and his family, R.C. was always well dressed in public, at work, and at the lodge rooms, so that theosophy might not be rated on a poor personal appearance. He made a point of this to all those who worked at UOT. R.C. continued his work and communications with others until, when overtaken by illness and pain, he left his body. That would have been on June 15, as the previous speaker mentioned, in 1919, without a word of complaint during the days of intense suffering that preceded his release. Some excerpts from obituaries. Thus spoke Robert Crosby in 1909, that which men call death is but a change of location for the ego, a mere transformation, a forsaking for a time of the mortal frame. A short period of rest before one reassumes another human frame in the world of mortals. The Lord of this body is nameless, dwelling in numerous tenements of clay. It appears to come and go, but neither death nor time can claim it. For it is deathless, unchangeable and pure, beyond time itself, and not to be measured. So our old friend and fellow worker has merely passed for a short time out of sight, but has not given up the work begun so many ages ago. The uplifting of humanity, to include the destruction of the shackles that enslave the human mind. No act of his ever led to disunion among theosophists, nor did he arrogate to himself authority of any kind, nor fail to discourage tendencies toward personal adulation on the part of fellow spirits. he made a living revival of the three objects of the Theosophical movement and delivered from neglect the three fundamental propositions of the secret doctrine. The honor given to R.C. is not a personal devotion. It is recognition of and gratitude for services which might have been the part of anyone who saw as he did, and in whom was born the same determination. To reverence the name and character of Robert Crosby, therefore, is to pledge allegiance to practical work for humanity. He stands for that. That the theosophy of H.P. Blavatsky and William Q. Judge is in the world today, that the history of the Theosophical movement is a record, that our opportunity to continue the movement itself as it was begun is not due to any of the Theosophical societies or successors or leaders, but to the loyalty of Robert Crosby, an humble pupil who chose with his eyes wide open to follow in the footsteps of his predecessors. Theosophy to him was a life to be lived. Where he had wisdom, he knew it and used it. Where he lacked wisdom, he had faith. Faith in the law, faith in the teaching, faith in the teacher. HPB said, be theosophist, work for theosophy. Theosophy first and theosophy last, for its practical realization alone can save the Western world. Robert Crosby took these words to heart, made them his own, found others who imbibed his spirit, drank at the same great source, and so can any theosophist, however humble or however situated. So and so alone will the great first object to form the nucleus of universal brotherhood be realized. A few months after the death of Mr. Crosby, B.P. Whiting, industrialist and prominent member of the Theosophical Society, visited Los Angeles, where he heard of Mr. Crosby for the first time. He became active in the work of ULT and was instrumental in spreading the movement with the establishment of ULTs in New York, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. in 1921, 100 years ago. Then in London, Paris, Amsterdam, The Hague, and finally in Bombay and Bangalore. To this day, there are workers in ULT dedicated to retaining the pristine quality and dedication to those principles that R.C. had culled from HPB and WQJ and embodied in the Declaration of ULT. Neither R.C. nor has any student of the ULT made any public claim to be a successor, leader, or teacher. Each student and inquirer has been carefully put into direct touch with HPB, our teacher, through her writings, original and unchanged. Each has been encouraged to study, work for theosophy, and practice that universal brotherhood which forms the unifying basis of all nature. Mr. Judge's writings have been selected for study and reproduction because they most faithfully and carefully follow and supplement Madame Blavatsky's writings. All students are encouraged to prove for themselves what's in these books. The Theosophical Society was keeping a new and revised issue of the Secret Doctrine available with over 30,000 alterations, and in addition had issued a spurious third volume. Number 11. In 1925 and 26, ULT reprinted and issued the original edition of the Secret Doctrine, which it has reprinted several times and is still available. Number 12. Notes on the Bhagavad Gita was purchased in 1928. This is the notes on here. I'm sorry, it was published in 1928. Mr. Judge had prepared notes for the first 7 chapters before his death. Mr. Crosby prepared the last 11 chapters, numbers 8 to 18. A photographic reprint of the original edition of Isis Unveiled, which is over here, was issued by ULT in 1930. This number 13. Isis was completely out of print by that time, and is now currently available. It was only after he had passed away that his written articles, talk, transcripts, and some of his letters were published in book form under his name. 2 such books are entitled The Friendly Philosopher, this one, number 14 down here. He makes such statements as, it is to the teachings that attention has to be called, not to ourselves, who are only handing them on as best we can. That's the Friendly Philosopher here, page 365. Quote, what is at the root of the schisms that have disrupted the Theosophical Society that HPB left? Personalities every time. What is the opposite of and corrective of personality? Nothing less than impersonality, which seeks nothing for itself and everything for the cause of theosophy, pure and simple. There is no worldly fame, glory, or profit in such a course, yet it, and it alone, removes every obstacle that might intervene between the message of theosophy and those who desire to study and apply it on its own merits. The mind of the race is still obsessed by the idea that it is important and essential to know who the active agents are, whereas the important thing is the merit of the thing done. Number 15. Answers to questions on the ocean of theosophy was issued in 1937. It's over here somewhere. Number 16, that was number 15. Number 16, all of HPB's and WQJ's books and their magazine articles have been reprinted several times, and an electronic version is also available online. The prime objective of ULT continues to be to remove all barriers between the student and the message of theosophy as it was presented by HPB and WQJ. Therefore, the original texts are printed or reprinted, and every inquirer is encouraged to approach these 2 teachers directly. The fruits and nature of RC and the ULT have kept genuine theosophy and the genuine theosophical movement alive in the world. At a period in this dark cycle, which is continuing, when it would surely otherwise have perished. For this, RC deserves the lasting gratitude of all students of theosophy and all lovers of the wisdom and the message transmitted by Helena Petrovna Blavatsky and William Quan Judge. Those seeking to truly be in accord with nature's law of universal brotherhood are invited to help us in the work of keeping the link to the teachings unbroken. Next Sunday is the United States Independence Day, July 4th. Our presentation will be on the influence of adepts in forming this country. Please join us here in our new location in the historic district, suburbs of DC, Manassas. Please join us here in person or as recorded on YouTube and associated links like Facebook or www.uotdc.org. Thank you for joining us. We will now have an informal meeting among ourselves to re-establish ourselves and carrying out the mission